Recording in progress.
Robertson here again, representing the business enterprise constituency. And I believe we are now meeting with Anna and Jonathan, who we've had the pleasure of meeting with once before in June of last year. Correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, are we starting with some remarks from you and the team, and then we'll go to discussion afterward? Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you very much. Huge thanks for being invited. It's a great pleasure to be back in person after virtually presenting last year. We wanted just to run through the agenda. I know we have about 45 minutes. We had planned maybe 20 minutes just for some theme setting and then to leave good time for discussion. And indeed, please interrupt us, put your hands up if you have questions. We'd love it to be more of a dynamic discussion. So my name is Annie Bergsey. I'm a program manager at the DCAF, the Geneva Center for Security Sector Governance. And I'm managing our strategic partnership with the International Committee of the Red Cross. And we're a bit of a strange organization. We're a nonprofit foundation based in Geneva. And we work on business security and conflict prevention, and very practically from advising companies to working with civil society actors on the ground on conflict mediation, to lowering company community conflicts, and then of course to integrating conflict sensitivity in policy initiatives, standards, and regulation. And maybe I'll pass the floor to my colleague Jonathan Kolyeb for an introduction.
Hi all, I hope you can hear me from half a world away. Greetings from Melbourne, Australia. I'm Associate Professor Jonathan Kolyeb. I am an academic at RMIT University, where I am the director of our Business and Human Rights Centre. Done a fair bit of work for a number of years with Australian Red Cross, International Committee of the Red Cross, and with DCAF on improving responsible business conduct and improving understandings of what that actually means in conflict-affected and high-risk areas. It's an absolute pleasure to brief you again.
Great. So just maybe a quick note, why are we here? Well, we're here because, we know that managing and responding to security, conflict, and human rights-related risks in conflict-affected and high-risk areas is really challenging for companies. But it's precisely in these contexts where the risk of companies being involved in human rights violations is particularly high. And because business can never be neutral, some even seemingly standard business decisions like land acquisitions or using certain suppliers or using public security forces can escalate grievances and tensions and create harms. And maybe to take this a little bit out of the abstract, companies are themselves recognizing this challenge and their own limitations and their needs for guidance. There are these, high-profile conflict-affected and high-risk areas, Democratic Republic of Congo in the east, Ukraine, Mozambique, where companies are reaching out to DCAF ICRC partnership for support. In Ukraine, recently, one major Swiss food and beverage company reached out to us for support on implementing better early warning systems when it comes to the reconstruction projects, restarting business there. In Democratic Republic of Congo, in 2023, I believe, we developed a training on conflict prevention for a major Chinese company and its staff, a cobalt mining company. It's a public case study, so I'm referring to these. And then, of course, in Mozambique, in the face of weakened governance structures following the post-election violence, companies are also really worried about how governance structures can support in assuring their ability to operate and in maintaining an operating environment. Earlier this week, I was in London, actually, at a major annual meeting of companies that gathered to strengthen implementation of responsible security, human rights, and respect for IHL. And we've had discussions just this week, in Ghana and Latin America context, which are not exactly striking you as high-risk areas off the top, but companies even there are recognizing that it's precisely in these contexts which have a legacy of conflict and violence that we need to also support companies to prevent that their operations aggravated. So just taking a little bit out of abstract that, you know, this is a high level and high profile demand by companies. And these issues are not niche. They're everywhere in many industries, agribusiness, mining, of course, and any industries where their supply chains touch Karas. Maybe, Jonathan, I see you waving your hand. Do you want to jump in? Go ahead.
I just echo Annie's comment at the start as well. If there's any questions or comments as we go, please feel free to jump in. I think that's a really important point that I just wanted to emphasize, because one of our messages to you all is, again, thank you for including, we welcome the inclusion of conflict-affected and high-risk areas as a standard material topic in the mining sector standard. But it really is not niche. Mining companies might be perhaps the most prominent and large-scale sort of grappling with these types of issues in conflict-affected areas. But precisely, it's the definition, it's the scope of conflict-affected and high-risk areas that really broadens the scope of applicability and relevance and salience to so many different companies, different industries, and different geographies. So everywhere from Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Europe, there are not only conflict zones, but certainly high-risk areas. So, for instance, those areas that might be recovering from armed conflict, we would deem as high risk, or those areas that might be prone to large-scale social unrest or have some political tensions that are at risk of slipping into armed conflict. So the scope really is global, and also industries. I think it would be wrong to think of conflict or CARAs as purely a mining or an extractive sector's issue. Just in the last few weeks, I've had a food and beverage, very prominent food and beverage company reach out to me about their operations, as well as an agricultural company with operations in Eastern Europe, wondering about these types of issues. I might leave it there for now. Annie, back to you.
No, indeed. And I think, you know, one of the reasons that we've also developed the report and the sort of promotional material, the fact sheet that was circulated is to kind of shed light also on the kind of holistic way that that companies need to take actions to address these risks, which I think ties into also our kind of key recommendations. You know, that it's more than just security management. It's more, you know, it's really ties into kind of a holistic approach of engaging a wide variety of stakeholders, you know, thinking about interactions with host governments, you know, memorandums of understanding, you know, clarity, transparency with communities, and, you know, monitoring business impacts. And these are sort of heightened human rights due diligence, I think, could be really adequately captured in a CARA's topic standard. And I think what's also important to highlight is, you know, companies are grappling with this, but somehow the reporting isn't there. And you know, I think in particular, you know, Jonathan, and we're collaborating and planning next steps of, you know, also how to understand the field of sustainability reporting on this topic. And our, you know, initial evidence suggests that it's just not there. And how can that be when these operations are happening? And how can it not be identified as a material risk? So I think it's really a knowledge gap. And I think having that lack of information, you know, kind of replicates a cycle of potential harms to rights holders. I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to jump in and share on that side.
Can I jump in? Because I think this is a really important point, and this is, again, the value of the GRI. You're not just ex post facto reporting framework. You actually provide guidance. Whether or not that's part of the mandate or remit. The fact is, so many companies look to the GRI framework for guidance about what it means to be a sustainable and responsible business. What does it mean to undertake responsible and sustainable business practices? OECD, the United Nations, guiding principles on business and human rights, they're all adequately referenced and cited as fundamental touchstones in the GRI framework. Well, those documents, authoritative statements, suggest that there needs to be a focus on conflict-affected areas, and arguably, if these companies using the GRI standards for reporting should be recognising off their own volition, off their own bat, that they are indeed that it is a material topic that they should be reporting on. The fact is, they are not. They are not disaggregating the fact that they are operating or doing business supply chains in carriers. And that's something that I think some of our recommendations really address, that there is an information gap, and there isn't perhaps an adequate, not just signal, but guidance from the GSSB and the GRI, for example, that might nudge them towards not just better reporting, but ultimately better practice in those areas. So I think I'm preaching to the converted, right? The value of reporting to influence actual corporate behaviour is well understood by you, by us.
And I think also just to add that in the kind of shifting ground we're on with the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, a kind of shift in language or maybe a pushback against the ESG language labels. I think GRI has really an opportunity to lead in this respect and set the kind of, really put it on the table, the expectation, which is sort of floating in the air and everybody sort of knows this, but really, laying it out that this is the international norm when it comes to conflict and affected operations in conflict affected areas. So we have 3 recommendations that we've proposed in the report and in the promotional document. We also recognize the enormous work that GRI has undertaken thus far in addressing this topic. Obviously, the mining standard. We've seen also the financial services exposure draft of the three financial services industries. Two of 3 reference conflict. We know that it's really a big organization, a big project, and we're really aware of the fact of the need for sort of consultation and how long it takes to turn the ship in a way, and so we've it's in that spirit that we have developed the 3 recommendations. So first, I think guidance with the existing world of GRI standards. I think we propose would be, really useful for companies. It's a bit of a soft start as well, and our report does make a bit of a suggestion of how that could look. I think, in particular, it's because companies are already reporting and using these standards. It's adding that lens of conflict sensitivity. Secondly, we've also suggested that the GSSB should initiate the development of a CARAS topic standard, and we through discussions with colleagues, we've sort of identified that perhaps a good starting point could be with the security services topic standard, because we understand it's sort of been planned to kind of revamp it and update it. And actually taking it, elevating it and expanding its scope beyond security, but really looking at these 3 issues of IHL and conflict sensitivity and security management could really be a way to sort of capture that. And because, as Jonathan was saying, because it's not just it's not sector specific, so a topic standard could really help to widen the scope for the community of companies. And then, I think a very long-term project, and this is multi-year a process in the work plan to update existing GRI standards, to sort of have that GRI lens when undertaking these updates, in this sort of expert working groups, or if that's the right language to use, that work on updating the standards, to have an expert on conflict-affected areas, to really bring that perspective is also, could be an ongoing priority for the GSSB. Jonathan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, maybe next slide. Just to elaborate a little bit on these recommendations, and again, let me just again applaud the GRI for the inclusion of the CARA's topic in the mining sector standard. I think that's really welcome, and we've seen mining companies react and respond and start asking questions as a response to that. So I think it's really, I'm very hopeful of the positive impact that that's going to have on the ground. It's only anecdotal at the moment, but fingers crossed. We see some more substantive reporting in the mining sector next year. In terms of that first recommendation, and really the first two about the standalone topic standard, but also the supplementary guidance. I want to be clear that we're not stamping our fist and saying, you guys have to do this. We've done a fair bit of the legwork already, and we would really welcome a conversation about how we can advance together this cause, this project. So part two of our report, which I know you have, provides, let's say, version 0.1 of what a supplementary guidance could look like. Doesn't change or alter any of the text of the GRI standards whatsoever. It simply is modelled off actually similar guidance that the GRI produced with UNICEF, I believe, in first about children's rights in GRI reporting. UNICEF produced a first version, and the GRI has embraced that and endorsed that. We would suggest that the same is possible here, and we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper. So this is just a quick screenshot of one of them, which provides, an example of what it could look like. Existing GRI standard on the left-hand side of your screen, and then some suggestions, recommendations for if you want to adopt as a reporting entity that CARA lens, or if you have identified that you are operating or doing business in a CARA, what might you be thinking about as you report on that GRI standard? So we hope that that's really useful. We think that there's really practical, substantive suggestions. For example, I'm just looking at one which was about operations with GRI disclosure 413, local communities. This topic standard suggests the focus of reporting should be on the impact of vulnerable local groups and communities. Communities and carers are frequently at risk from experiencing potential negative impacts of companies and their security providers. When reporting in line with these pre-existing disclosures, place a special emphasis on communities and carers, both in terms of community engagement and adverse impacts. So it really just tries to layer on top of the existing reporting work that these companies or reporting entities are already doing, and placing like that CARA lens that we suggest. It's by no means perfect. There's always room for improvement, I'm the first to admit. And we're really keen to work with the GRI Secretariat and GSSB to make this not just improve in substance, but also in terms of hopefully adding the GRI's formal imprimatur, similar to what was done with the children's rights in sustainability reporting framework, which I think included a foreword by the GRI CEO, for example, and was in such some extent endorsed by the GRI. I think that would give it a fair bit of heft as well in terms of legitimacy. And then the next slide, please, Annie. The other thing that we've done, which I think is really important, is between our three organisations, we surveyed the literature of what does it mean to be a responsible business in conflict-affected and high-risk areas, and we identified 3 particular domains of action and built good practices around those based on the literature. So again, a lot of the legwork has been done. And what we tried to do is draft what could a GRI topic standard look like. And this is the entirety of it. It is literally just 3 pages, focused around eight disclosures with some sub-disclosures, but trying to mirror what a GRI topic standard could be. And I hope that there's some familiarity in terms of the approach and the language that we've adopted. And again, really keen for some conversations about that, but also, you know, what are the chances of listening to your next 3-year work plan? I think it would be a really welcome addition. Back to you, Annie.
And maybe just zooming in a little bit on one of the disclosures, you know, conducting heightened human rights due diligence, because I think it also really shows the kind of you know, widening the approach to the topic. You know, we at DCAF and in the DCAF ICRC partnership, we really try to underscore that any human rights challenge has the potential to become a security risk, and vice versa, that security risks become human rights abuses. And it's this feedback loop that is, I think, critical to address. And you know, there are externalities of company operations. There are, you know, legacy issues, unmet expectations or misunderstandings about non-related issues like employment or land, compensation, resettlement, and then as well, you know, the ongoing company impacts on you know, strain on resources or water or you know, perceptions of you know, favoring different subgroups in a community. And when these grievances go unaddressed, they can escalate into tensions, and that's why we've sort of, yeah, we were sort of advocating that taking the security provider's topic standard and sort of expanding it can really help in kind of addressing this feedback loop and supporting guidance for companies. So, I mean, we'll open up for discussion. We have our contact details there, and also the report. I've brought a few copies to circulate, but you know, it's also all available online, and we're keen to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you both once again for the presentation and follow-up from our last discussion in June. Any questions or comments? Charles?
Yes, I am Charles. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting and I think needed. The 2 parts questions. You are recommending potentially a separate sector standard, at the same time embedding CARAs in all of the standards. I'm a more proponent of embedding it than having a separate standard alone. Kind of like we had a discussion yesterday about just transition and having it all across the standards. So including like every standard should consider CARA, I guess. The other thing I was trying to read some examples. So first reaction was, can you give me some examples? So you did. It seems like this relationship is more going to affect the company than the company is going to affect those areas. I mean, it's not 0 or 1, but there will be more chances that the entity is affected by those conflicts than the entity is going to impact. So it's because, you know, in the GSSB, we are also looking at GRI, you know, materiality impact. In that sense, some of the disclosure seems to be oriented towards more impact on the company, which is fine too. But I'm just wondering if there is more potentially explicit language to make sure that we also capture those impacts on those areas, if any, so that it doesn't confuse. But it's a tricky one because the fact of this context makes it so that I cannot think of a bigger conflict like, okay, you have operations in those conflicted area, of course it's going to be impacted, but also the companies have impact there. So just trying to see if we're more explicit type of examples. So those are my two comments. Yeah.
No, thanks a lot for that. And indeed, I mean, I think, on your first question about embedding versus a standalone topic standard, we're aware that there are sort of different ways of cutting the cake and different ways to address this. I think given the long work plan of updating standards, it's a big universe of GRI standards. We considered that a standalone topic standard is kind of a bit of also an efficiency step. It helps to address the issue a bit faster. And then I think also, referencing that in the update of other standards could be, it's not one or the other, but it could be a way to address it. And then on the topic of, materiality and impacts on the community versus impacts on the company, I think it's, well, at least, I mean, I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to jump in, but from our side, I mean, we cannot understate how much company operations can impact conflict dynamics, and DCAF's work on the ground. We have, the way we work is we have civil society partners that support these multi-stakeholder platforms in different countries, where companies, grassroots organizations, and embassies and different actors that have a stake in business security, human rights come together. And we support these platforms in Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's 4 in-country working groups, including in Eastern Congo. And our colleagues there are actually refugees in Burundi now. In Peru, in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Mozambique. And, I think it's, because a company in these contexts is never neutral, and the way, I can I'll maybe pause there. I'll just reflect on maybe having a concrete example from those contexts that I can share, because some of the work is a bit sensitive. But, just pulling up, for example, Mozambique and the biggest oil and gas companies that operate there, and, the fact that a company whose GDP is bigger than whose annual revenue is bigger than the GDP of the entire country, and what that means for expectations, what that means for rivalries between groups and an ongoing insurgency, it's and the impacts on the communities is, it cannot be understated. So I think it absolutely, there is an impact on the company itself, of course, and that's often what companies think about. But from our work with communities, that's really our focus in this project. But maybe Jonathan, if you want to jump in.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, Charles, for those 2 really good questions. So let me add a little, and I don't want to repeat what Annie has said. I think we're concerned, firstly, if embedding CARA standards in sector standards is what you choose to adopt, the approach you choose to adopt, we would welcome that. I think that is absolutely a huge step forward. I just caution that, again, as Annie said, these development of standards takes time. And if we're going to devote time to a CARA's topic, I would suggest that this is perhaps one of the largest human rights impacts on people and planet that companies can have. It deserves, it warrants a standalone topic along with the other 3 dozen odd individual topic standards, and that's industry agnostic. Because again, the agriculture company or the coal company who already has a sector standard but doesn't have conflict and high risk areas in it, where do they go? It's not in our sector standard, and therefore because again, I understand the way the GRI framework is supposed to work, but at the end of the day, we also, I think, all understand the way companies actually do use it, which is if it's not in the list, they don't go ahead and proactively create and acknowledge material topics all the time that are outside that the list that GRI has provided. And I just wanted to highlight then, like you are currently developing 3 financial sector standards, and yet there's already some treatment of carriers. So I believe all 3 drafts are out. As Annie mentioned, 2 of those exposure drafts does reference carriers, whereas the insurance sector does not, which I haven't had an opportunity yet to understand, but I'm keen to understand why that distinction. So I'm just concerned about lack of consistency across industries. So we think a topic standard might be a better way to go. And then just, if I may, Charles, just gently push back on what you said about impacts on communities, because I think we're absolutely 110% in fierce agreement with you that we need to be thinking about the impacts on communities, not just the impacts on the companies. Standalone topic standard references actually talks, disclosure 1 is all about how does the company embed conflict sensitivity, and disclosure 2, the proposed disclosure 2, is all about how has the company conducted heightened human rights due diligence. So what we've tried to do is build disclosures that ask the company to look inwardly at their own policies and practices and conduct about externally. So if you're doing a genuine conflict risk assessment and heightened human rights due diligence, you're asking those impact questions. But that's very hard to measure and also hard for a company to disclose in any great detail in a public sustainability report. Whereas the mechanisms that they have put into place to conduct heightened human rights due diligence, to conduct a conflict impact assessment, I think those perhaps are more reasonable and realistic disclosures. But again, happy to hear more feedback on that point.
Great, thank you both for the thorough responses there. I have Carol, and then Rebecca, and then Anne, and I have one myself.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the work that you've been doing on this. Really questions for the standards division now. We do so when are they due for revision? And also, what would the standards division recommendations be on this? For example, we've already discussed guidance and how it's not well used today, and that's your first recommendation. So yes, I guess those are questions for the standards division.
So I think picking up on the point that where should something like this sit in the structure of the GI standards? Part of the rationale of the sector program was to surface topics and see whether they actually are consistently coming back across many sectors. And that would then, to Nora's point earlier, actually open up the opportunity to bring them into the topic standards. And we do believe that this is one of the topics that is maybe, unfortunately, now, today, even more so, one of the things that absolutely belongs into the universe of the topic standards. And that brings me to the second point, is where are resources well invested? It's not a fundamentally new topic to us because there is the link to human rights. And I think the colleagues have already referenced that all the underpinning conceptual groundwork is already in the standards, but it would still necessitate a separate topic standard because you have to take a particular perspective and you have to attend to it, and then you have to activate it in your material topics, if you will, in a specific way. It can be part of general human rights due diligence, but as much as for other sustainability topics, you would then have a particular course of action, and you would have a particular course of surfacing the impacts. So I don't think including it would change, and then this is the first part of your question, Carol, would change the human rights constants as they stand right now. I would not see the human rights content in the, we don't expect any fundamental changes in the business and human rights concepts that have found their way into the GRI standards. So when we open up the universal standards, I'm not expecting that we would review that portion of it. So it wouldn't necessarily, except for maybe a reference here and there to flag the topic, would not change our approach there. So the most effective way to bring it back to the GI standards is as part of a new topic standard.
Great, thank you both. Rebecca.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions regarding your work and how that may impact or not the potential standards. How do you remain impartial? And can you give us some color as to the size of the companies that come to you for guidance and the sort of country of incorporation?
Mm-hmm. No, excellent question. Thank you. And indeed, I mean, impartiality. Okay, we're Swiss organizations, so starting from the standpoint of the Swiss neutrality, long tradition of Swiss neutrality. I'm Canadian myself, but we're quite international. But we are a Swiss foundation. Our donor is also the Swiss government. We do have partnerships with companies, and I think our work is really in the. It's a sort of non-naming, not naming, shaming. We're not an advocacy organization, and we do work with all actors. However, all of our work has the public good element to it. So we may undertake projects with companies, advisory support to companies, but our red line is sort of there must be a wider lessons learning, there must be a public good, and also we always try to embed everything we do with those working groups on the ground that are led by civil society and that do have that one sustainability and taking forward, embedding it in local dynamics. So, I think it's a tough situation because we are confronted regularly with very difficult situations, but we always operate from the standpoint that if a company is coming to us for that advice, it's a symbol of goodwill and sort of wanting to advance. So that's a little bit on the first side. And the color of the size of companies, well, it ranges quite dramatically, and we have focused a lot on the extractive industry. However, there's been cocoa and coffee companies, traders, pharma, and manufacturing and food and beverage, I think they're called. And it ranges, I think a couple examples that, recently in November, we had an event, which was a kind of discussion. Jonathan was there in Geneva. It was a closed door discussion with companies, on this topic. And, it was sold out, and it ranged from sort of luxury goods, the kind of high-end products, to extractives, to different elements in companies in the supply chain, and it was sold out, and so it's a range of companies that are interested in this. We also, we had one speaker from a smaller gemstone mining company, who reported that one of the countries that they operate in, the government is requiring sustainability reporting, not necessarily GRI, and Nora, I know I promised to get back to you on that. So they didn't mention GRI in the reporting requirements, but the government is requiring sustainability reporting, and one of the elements is conflict. And the company has actually used GRI, the mining sector standard, already in submitting its report, its sustainability report. So, you know, there's that, and then there's the sort of smaller companies that, you know, have a much smaller share of the market to, you know, the big major oil and gas companies, the big major mining companies. It's really quite a diverse range. Yeah.
As
Thank you
well
both.
as well as law firms and management consulting firms too, that are actually providing expertise and guidance on reporting on the GRI, are also reaching out as well. In terms of nationalities, I'm not sure the nationality of the person that asked, but yes, we do have Dutch domiciled companies, Aussie domiciled companies. But as you might imagine, due to the sensitivities of these types of conversations and consultations, we, well, at least, yeah, we need to respect the confidential nature of those consultations.
Got it. Thanks, Jonathan. Over to you, Anne.
Thank you very much. And also for me, a little bit more understanding about your organisation, and, you know, having a look at the handout that you've helpfully shared. I suppose, firstly, I'd be really interested to know that within your approach to heightened human rights due diligence, does that also include criteria for when a business should, in fact, decide not to be operating in a conflict-affected or high-risk area in terms of overall management strategy? And then secondly, I'd be very interested in terms of to what extent have you looked at supply chain risks as well? So coming from a global union that's obviously very concerned at the moment about the risks to crews on vessels in the Gulf. So is that something, have you got a value chain or supply chain element to your approach?
Maybe I'll take the first one and then I'll pass the hard one to Jonathan. No, no, indeed. So I think responsible exit, responsible remain. It's certainly a difficult topic. I think our perspective is that, well, it's a decision the company has to make, but it's I think better to remain responsibly, and to sort of for companies to sort of find a way to take all the different externalities into account and find a way to remain, because often what happens is when a company leaves, the entity that takes over is often much worse in terms of human rights respect. And so, it's an element. It's an element in another major toolkit that we have, that it goes into how companies can, what elements to consider when remaining or exiting a context. But it's certainly been, we try to do everything to help a company stay. And these questions are also quite politically sensitive, and there's often an emotional charge to it. We don't, we don't take a stand on that, but we do seek to support companies to find a way to remain. Jonathan?
Yeah, responsible remain, responsible exit is a vexed question, to say the least, and I don't actually think that wouldn't be the role, I don't think, of reporting standards either, right? Although, again, it's not to preclude one action or another. Really, the reporting standards, or that we suggest, are about process. Have we engaged with a rigorous process, conducted that heightened human rights due diligence, including a conflict sensitivity assessment, conflict mapping, an assessment of those human rights impacts within the conflict context? So whether or not the company chooses to remain or exit, I think is neither here nor there for the purposes of GRI framework, but more than happy to have a conversation, Rebecca, afterwards, something that I am grappling with. In terms of supply chains, thank you so much for that question. I think so often we get sidetracked into just direct operations. As you say, though, supply chains is relevant here. So I would suggest that we could do better in terms of our proposal that we've already set up. But I draw your attention to GRI 414, an existing topic standard, supplier social assessment. The reporting organisation shall report the number of suppliers assessed for societal impacts and what the response was to any actual or potential negative societal impact. So we've actually highlighted that one, for example, that is explicitly about the supply chain, and added in our supplement some guidance on some additional questions and prompts for carers. Similarly, with GRI 408, child labour, your existing child labour standard, which talks about operations and suppliers. Again, I think that carers looms large when it comes to human trafficking and child trafficking. And the same with GRI 409, compulsory or forced labour. So I think it is already covered in our supplement, but absolutely should be a focus.
Mhm. And indeed, and again, just to clarify, I mean, I think also the reason why, indeed, Jonathan, as you say, this report, this project, this doesn't take a stance on whether companies should remain or exit. But because we know, I mean, these companies, it's not like they can just close shop and disappear. It's a long process of exiting, and it's almost like they're remaining while they're exiting. So that's sort of the stand that DCAV ICRC takes, and DCAV's approach is, they're remaining even while they're exiting in a way. It's months and years sometimes process. So there's a little bit of a nuance there.
Great, thank you both. We're down to our last few minutes here, so maybe myself, I don't know if anyone else has any questions after, looking like no. Apologies, Annie and Jonathan, if I missed this in the text documents, or maybe I'm asking too much. Do you have any sense of, in the universe of GRI reporters, 12,000, 13,000, somewhere in there, companies, do you have any sense of how many of those companies might find CARAs to be a material topic for them?
Yeah, so we're hoping for a grant to come through soon that will help us address this. Any day now, we're waiting for some good news, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, that mapping, well, Jonathan, I'll let you jump in, but that mapping, it'll be part of sort of the next phase of our work. Maybe not, we won't scope all 12,000, you say, reporters, right. But certainly a good chunk of them.
I'd put it a different way, if that was Damien. I would, and I forget the language that you used, but of the 13,000 GRI reporters who should be considering CARAs as a material topic, all of them is my response. There is rarely a medium to large company in any industry that does not have direct operations or supply chains or customers that don't go through at least one conflict affected or high risk area.
Yeah, maybe, and actually, I have it just came to my mind an example. We recently had an exchange with a recent PhD graduate who had undertaken research on southern Tanzania on the Mozambique border, where there's some offshore gas development. And Tanzania is a peaceful, it's maybe not, some companies would not consider it a high risk area, although the border with Mozambique, it's arbitrary, it's a porous border, so that brings an element to it. And I think this company had struggled because they had not really undertaken an adequate assessment of the dynamics and impacts on youth in the community. So in the community engagement piece, it's this intersectionality and this a region that has been historically kind of sidelined and underdeveloped in Tanzania, to a population subgroup that has very unique perspectives on development, on future, on its future, on its rights, and the company hadn't adequately kind of scoped that and included youth as a specific element of community consultations, and it led to the kind of boom and bust of the gas industry in that region had led to a lot of protests in the end, and it created you know, a violent uprising in the region. And so, you know, it's not like we want to sort of advocate that every context becomes a conflict affected and high risk area. That's not the point at all. But taking into account these legacies, you know, this kind of deep understanding of the context can help you know, avoid harms. And avoid, you know, the fact that company impacts on the community escalate to these kinds of challenges. So, you know, we're not advocating for this multiplication of CARAs, but certainly that asking questions, like I think for me, what's interesting in the standards is that they prompt companies to ask the right questions, you know, and if those questions aren't there, then the company can't reflect on it. And so that's sort of maybe where we want to leave it is that, yeah, I think it's important to ask those questions of companies.
Please, Susanna.
Said. So I'm Susanna from Labour constituency, and you know, like what we notice is definitely the prevalence of the freedom of association and collective bargaining rights violations in conflict areas, where the workforce may not be free. I mean, we see these forces in power which are not democratically elected that use armed forces to discipline workforce, and sometimes, unfortunately, some businesses can be complicit in it. So, for instance, businesses can call on the armed forces to curb strike actions. So, I see that in the analysis, the GRI 407 is not included. So I think maybe in you know, follow up, that would be actually interesting to have specific you know, guidance on freedom of association in conflict areas. And just another notion, I mean, you also like another fundamental labor right is non-discrimination, which is a GRI 406, and that could also be valuable to be specifically analyzed in the context of conflict areas.
Excellent. Thanks, Susanna. So we're up on time. The timing of the presentation today is quite fortuitous as we're looking at options for our next 3 years work plan this afternoon. But for now, we'll say thank you very much again to Annie and Jonathan. And
Can I mention, you will stay for lunch, right? So there are opportunities for the GSB members to interact.
Yeah.
for sure.
Thank you very much. And just, you know, use us. We're we're here, you know, to support. Like, rely on us. Come to us. We're open for business.
Thank you, Annie.
Thank you.
And for the folks on the line, we're returning at 1 for a private session and 3 p.m. local time for the resumption of the public session. Thank you very much.